Hi, everybody. Welcome to Build 2025. Who's ready to talk about AI-powered app modernization for .NET? All right, like 5 of you. Great. I'm 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, I'm the product manager for MS-Build, the .NET SDK, and this really cool Copilot-aided .NET modernization tool that we're going to talk about a little bit later today. And I'm so excited to be on this stage with the great Scott Hunter to talk to you about all sorts of wonderful things. Scott, why should people know you?
I did .NET forever. So you probably know me from .NET. I worked in .NET for most of my career at Microsoft, but last couple of years I've been doing a bunch of Azure work, and I'm going to show how we've taken some of our Azure migration tech that we just showed in Jay's keynote this morning for Java, how we have .NET versions of the same stuff.
Yep. That's exactly right. If you've been by the booth so far, you will see some things here that you saw already, but we're going to go a little deeper, all right? So first, I need to try and sell you all on a core concept, which is that it's good to upgrade .NET. Those of you who are interested in real long, weighty reads may be familiar with the tome that Stephen Tobe puts out every year. Performance is a huge motivating factor. Right? And so we want to make sure that your apps are running on the newest versions of the runtimes as soon as they come out. We want to reduce that cost for you to upgrade. But it's not just performance. Each of those releases, and in fact, every single one of our monthly servicing releases, come with security fixes as well. Right? We are actively improving the runtime to protect you from things that you might not even know you were vulnerable to. So it's important that we keep you on new runtimes so that you can pick up those fixes as well. Also, all of the tooling releases that come with each new version of the .NET SDK themselves can be compelling reasons to upgrade. And so even though upgrading tooling doesn't necessarily force upgrades of TFMs, the two things typically happen in a linked way. There are also compliance and support life cycles that are in play here. You all may be familiar with the LTS versus STS models, the long-term and short-term supports. Oh, wow, I see heads all over. Good job on being read up on that. But because those life cycles are limited in duration, it's important that we make the process of upgrading well understood and easy so that you can stay supported for the entire duration of your app's chosen runtime support cycle. And then finally, the community and ecosystem of .NET. Every single person authoring NuGet packages out there, or MS-Build task integrations, or rosin analyzers is making their own decisions about what frameworks to target. And if something that you rely on advances ahead of where your team is, it becomes more and more important for you to also stay on top of these upgrades as well. So that's sort of a collection of motivations, a collection of reasons for why upgrading .NET is legitimate.
Let's ask the hard question. Who in the room still has a .NET framework application still?
I'm not looking.
There we go.
Oh, lots of you.
That looks like at least a third or more. So I also want to say something else, which is if you have a .NET Framework application and you're worried that we're going to end support for .NET Framework, do not worry about that. I just talked to a customer an hour ago, and they were panicked that they're looking at the Windows Server 2028 something something, and I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. So I would tell people, if you have old .NET Framework applications, do not fear. We don't plan to deprecate anything or remove anything. In fact, Windows needs .NET to run. Visual Studio is still written in .NET Framework, and Azure runs on .NET Framework. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to go anywhere. When we do these migration kind of talks, we talk about this. In many cases, it's important to me that if you are going to go migrate a .NET Framework application, I tell people if you don't really touch the app anymore, then maybe it's not worth the migration. But if you're touching the app on a regular basis, then maybe you want to take access to, advantage of all the new tools and stuff that we have in the newer bits. Other people that have .NET Framework applications, how many are web forms? Okay.
All right, 10%?
Yeah, 10%.
All right.
So that's the only one that's hard to move away from. The rest are actually pretty easy. So.
Yeah, just a couple little grace notes to put on top of that is like targeting framework is a still supported thing. It's very first class. You can do this from the new tooling as well. For vast swaths of the .NET Framework ecosystem, you can use the .NET SDK to build and compile your apps, right? So don't let a perception that you are on framework for VS targeting reasons or for some technology that you're using stop you from looking at the tooling aspect of things too, right? So just keep your eyes open there. That's upgrades, right? So upgrades I see as kind of like a cost that teams have to be aware of, that they need to consider over the total life cycle of their application, right? This is the earth is moving underneath you, the treadmill is going, and so to keep your support cycles going, you need to upgrade. But there is an entire category of code changes that isn't directly related to upgrades that is also important to talk about, and that's modernization. These are changes that aren't necessarily keeping up with tooling. They are more perhaps architectural in nature, right? They enable your application to take advantage of new deployment or runtime patterns, right? The change from full web APIs to HTTP triggered or message triggered Azure functions is a good example of this. Decomposing your application into smaller parts that can be managed individually and orchestrated independently. That requires significant changes to the way your app is designed and reasoned about. And that is an entirely separate kind of work than the sort of point A to point B work of upgrades. There are a whole bunch of reasons you might do this, like I said, to take advantage of architectural patterns, to sort of centralize and remove cross-cutting functionality into a component that can handle it on its own, to simplify the rest of the app, to enable scalability and sort of scale up, scale down deployments for things like Azure Container Apps or Azure Kubernetes pods. And there's also kind of like a we are modern, we are staying on top of things factor to this too, right? Staying on top of trends and best practices can help you attract and retain talent. But most important to businesses in many ways is reducing costs. The more you can take advantage of things that your cloud provider provides to you, the more sort of aligned you can be with the way they want you to architect your apps, the less sort of arbitrary hardware you have hanging around that you have to justify managing and spending developer time on. So I want to stop here and sort of point out the contrast between upgrade and modernize, right? Point A to point B, free-form, future-facing. To many customers, including many of you that I've been talking with at the modernization booth so far this week, they don't feel materially different to you. But a lot of the tools we're going to talk about that are available today and have been available in the past lie at different points on the spectrum. So as we're looking at some of these tools, I'm going to be calling out, like, this one is focused on upgrades, this one is focused on modernization, and these kinds of modernization. Okay? Cool. Let's get into the fun stuff. We've got some tools to help you upgrade today, right? And modernize today. So we're going to take a brief moment to look at the .NET Upgrade Assistant and the Azure Migrate tool with a couple of hands-on demos. So we're going to start with the .NET Upgrade Assistant. So this is the world that we live in today. I want to make sure that the slideshow stops. There we go. And we go to our demo. So here we are in VS, and we have a demo solution up here with all kinds of projects. These are all framework targeting, and we have the daunting task that we are facing of trying to migrate these to various flavors of .NET Core and various sort of matching technologies here. There are sort of two aspects to this problem. One is knowing the scale of the work that we're looking at, and the other is then doing that work. And that's where the .NET Upgrade Assistant can come in. This will do two things for you. And the way I like to start is to do the report, the analysis report. When you do this tool, you run through a couple steps here that help you choose what your destination is going to be. And there are some knobs that we can twiddle that we'll talk about later. But it will scan the workspace that you're in right now and give you a wonderful report of where some of the problem areas are in your application. Have any of you done like a web framework to core migration before? Oh yeah, good number of hands. There's a whole bunch to change, right? It's not just the view layer, it's the way routes are mapped. It's the configuration for your web host, IIS or Kestrel or whatever you were using, how you stand that up, how you do dependency injection, like from the top of the stack all the way down through the bottom. And especially before some of the things that we're going to talk about later, it was hard to know sort of the scope of the problem you were dealing with. And that's where this kind of report can come in very handy. So after just a couple seconds of analysis, we can now look at an aggregated dashboard sort of telling us the categories of problems that we're dealing with, as well as detailed sort of summaries of a project-by-project view of some of the tasks that we have to do. There are some opinions in this tool. We try and break it down into like story points to give you a size or a rough size estimate. But you can drill and slice this a few different ways and get down to specific kinds of issues that might be trivial, like changing target frameworks, or might be massive, like, hey, in-unit framework has drastically changed the way that their API looks after you do the migration, right? But at least with this report, you have a sense of what the problem is. And as the poet says, knowing is half the battle. So you can use this to sort of attack your problem, and there's also a way to use this to actually solve your problem. If you go project by project in here, you can choose the kind of upgrade you want to do. And I want to point out a couple facets of the Upgrade Assistant today. Depending on the kind of project you use, you have different kinds of upgrades available to you for the .NET portion of things. You can do it in place, or you can do it side by side, which is good when you need to do sort of A/B golden master style testing. Or for a web application, an ASP.NET application, you can do side by side incremental, which sort of incrementally migrates particular slices of it and is more geared towards a non-automatic, lots of manual intervention. This is going to take a while, so I need to be good at every step kind of migration, right? So that last one is only applicable for ASP.NET or ASP old applications. There are a couple of fun other migrations you get for free that are kind of useful. How many of you in here are familiar with NuGet Central Package Management? All of you that are raising your hands are my favorite people. Central Package Management is a great way to ensure that you've only got one version of a NuGet package in use for each package across all of your repos. This is a really handy way to get on that train. There are some community and I think a first-party CLI tool that you can use to do this as well. But while you're already here, highly suggest you look at it and try it.
We're just waiting for Jared to give us the feature where we can actually load multiple packages in the same process.
Man, the heartburn that you just inspired in me. DLL aliasing and dealing with that is like a non-trivial amount of the discussions that Jared and I have. And then the last thing here is migrating your app from the sort of full-featured project files to the slimmer SDK project styles. This is a great intermediate step that you can use. If you do this, you get access to package reference. You get access to using the .NET CLI. It's a great first step on your journey. You have access to all of these in this VS extension and via a CLI. You can do many of the things I just did directly from the CLI. There's a .NET tool that you can do called Upgrade Assistant. You can install it globally, and then you can run it with Upgrade Assistant, Analyze, and then you can choose a project. So I'll go to the WPF one and have it do that.
I talked to customers today that had no idea there was a command line version of this as well. It was a VS Code developer, and they're like, is there one I can use in VS Code? And there definitely is.
Hmm? So yeah, this is a great tool if your teams don't use Visual Studio, if you are Visual Studio Code focused, or if you are a Vim user like Jared, then you have all of these options available to help you learn more. And that'll generate a report in a number of different formats. .NET 9 Upgrade Report. And there's a few aspects of this report that I didn't touch on, but if you're keeping this internally, you can use this unrestricted option, and you will get really, really nice like code links to the specific problems after it does the generation. So you can do both the analysis and the actual migration stuff from the CLI per project, just like you can from VS. So
this
really great tool.
This looks scary to me. This is like going to generate this huge file of all these things I'm supposed to go do. I hope there's a better way.
You know, I have a sneaking suspicion that there might be a better way that we're going to talk about just a little bit later. And that is the end of the demo for the
And you've
current
upgraded
slide.
nothing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've upgraded nothing because I want to make sure we have time to do the really fun stuff. But pretend all those things worked great because it's a demo repo, and it would be a very poor demo repo if it didn't actually work great. The project types that this works on are listed here. There are some really, this tool is really great for framework to core upgrades. And I'm hammering on that now because it'll be relevant later. But this is a great start to get you onto the core train. And then we have other tools available that we'll talk about later to go core to core.
Let me ask questions here. I
Hit
don't
it.
see Web API here, and it should do that as well, I think.
Yes, it should. Yeah.
So it does Web API as well. And also, what would I do if I have a WCF project?
That's a good question. VJ, do you know the answer to that off the top of your head? We'll answer that in a Q&A after later.
Because we did create a smaller port of WCF.
Open
to
WCF,
do some of the
yeah.
internal migrations we've done at Microsoft. So we've done a lot of these migrations at Microsoft ourselves. And so one of the teams inside of Microsoft was using WCF, and we're like trying to just go rewrite all that into something else was just too much work. And so the first step was just to get the thing to compile again. And so we did do a WCF port. It's not full featured. It's in many cases we kind of said it's the features you should use, and we've left out the features you should not use. WCF had way too many features that were arcane and stuff like that. But and I see Azure Functions Console and libraries. Will this go to Azure Functions?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I like to think of it for the WCF part specifically. It's like Douglas Crawford's book, JavaScript, the good parts. OpenWCF is WCF, the great parts. So that is what is available today for .NET Framework to core and core-to-core migrations, or at least that was the case as of 2 days ago.
And I'm going to have fun here and go,
Yeah?
You know what? We're Microsoft. We should make another tool. Because that's what we do, right? It's like we're not good at names, and we're not good at making more than one thing. So what you got next, Chet?
Well, actually, that is something I was hoping you would tell me, because
Oh, we want to go to more old tools. Okay.
Oh yeah, we want to let people know what's available now and compare and contrast against the wonderful world that is available now minus a day and a half.
So let's make some more stuff. So I will just always be curious. And once again, as I said, we're great at names at Microsoft. Go back to the slide for a second. That's the Azure Migrate Application Code Assessment Tool. Oh my God, that's a mouthful. Has anybody in the room used this tool? The tool that nobody knows. Flip me back, and this is a tool, and it exists both in command line as well as a UI. And the UI is very similar to the Upgrade Assistant UI that you just showed a second ago. This is about, hey, I have an application on premise and I want to move it to the cloud. What are the steps required to go get this app ready for the cloud? And so it's just you can see here, it's just an extension for VS, and just brought it up so you see it. And of course, I'm not going to do this. I was just laughing right before Chet and I were looking. I'm like, ooh, I could update. Don't update before builds. And anyways, if I go back and look at this tool, I've got an old MVC music store. This is a sample we wrote like 2010, and I want to move it to the cloud. So let's, old MVC style application. And I can kick this off here as well. I just got to scroll down here, and there will be a re-platform to Azure. And UI looks exactly the same as the Upgrade Assistant. I can go click New Report. And in my case, because this is an older application that probably is on .NET Framework, I'm going to look at going to App Service for Windows, choose my destination. Same UI Chet showed you before. I'm just going to use the source code for this app. And yep. And so we'll generate this nice report, kind of like you saw before, with a bunch of the issues that we have here. You see 2 of these are must fix before I move it to Azure, and the rest of those are kind of not required. You can see here, let's go look at must fix. Mandatory Windows authentication. Azure does not have Windows authentication, so we've got to change that out. Chet didn't really talk about this, but these things are kind of semi-Copilot enabled. I can come over here and click the Ask Copilot button, and I'll get some help. But it's more like just reading the docs to me. I can't copy and paste this into the app or do anything. I have to be a developer that knows what this actually means, and I have to go do this work.
Feels like that was state of the art like a year ago.
This was state of the art a year ago. I was super impressed. I could go push the Copilot button and get people to get excited about this. Some of the stuff is not super, it's like, hey, maybe you could actually, this is static content. You could use a CDN for that. Connection strings. I'm using bad old connection strings. Let's go fix those. And so the tool kind of just gives you a bunch of these types of things that I can go do. And in my case, I went a little further than Chet. I'm going to go and just change branches here. And I'll rerun the report. And now I'm good. So in this case, we did actually go and do the steps. Now this app's ready to go to Azure. I could right-click Publish to Azure right from the tool now, and I'm good to go. But that's what these tools are meant to do, is just help you get your app ready for Azure. But once again, as I said, both of these feel like kind of like static file analysis to me. They don't do a lot of work for you. We were really proud about this, and then Microsoft's field and sales came to me and said, Scott, this is great. Now I give Jared this list of 1,200-line file. Please go fix all these things. And Jared's like, I'm out.
His answer was to write analyzers instead to do it for you.
And so we want to now move and talk about, well, this is the Build AI conference, so let's talk about AI.
It feels like we should have an AI answer for some of these problems, and the good news is we do. So first, we're going to talk about upgrades for .NET. And as Scott was mentioning, names are great. This one is very self-descriptive. This is a GitHub Copilot feature around application modernization. And specifically, we are focusing on upgrading .NET projects and solutions and workspaces. We're focusing on core-to-core for this first release. This is everything I'm going to show you is in public preview right now. You can go to the VS Marketplace and install the very thing that I'm going to walk you through in just a bit. The sort of main learnings that we took away from the .NET Upgrade Assistant, or Upgrade Assistant, that we wanted to improve with Copilot was to be more aware of the dependencies in your projects, between the projects themselves and the packages that you used. And we wanted to use that knowledge of the dependencies to not only bump your vulnerable packages when we can detect that that's a gap that you have, but also like learn about the way the packages are used and try to automatically fix problems that might occur when you upgrade between potentially breaking versions of a package. We also wanted to not only create and define a set of automated upgrade steps that we could follow, but then execute those, right? To move from the description example that Scott showed a little earlier in the GitHub Copilot chat pane to something that was independent to a degree. But when it failed at being independent, when it found errors that it could not resolve, we wanted it to be trivial to pull the user into that loop, into a space where they had Copilot context and tools that they could use to solve whatever that problem was. When that user in the loop session was done, we wanted to ensure that the tool could learn from what the user had done so that repeated invocations of that particular error could be solved trivially. And then we wanted to ensure that it was integrated with Git, so that each step along the way we could checkpoint the progress that we had, so that the user was in complete control to go see, between A, B, C, D, each step along the way, here is what Copilot did to your code to solve the problems that it thought you were going to face, right? So the key theme here should be using the knowledge that .NET tooling has had about your project for a long time. You're used to rich experiences in VS, pushing that context into Copilot so it can do the more frustrating or long or recurring parts of this process for you and sort of elevate your experience into something that is less frustrating, since we're going to force you to do it every year, So let's see what it looks like. OK, coming back to VS, I need to get out of the thing again. There we go.
There you go.
By the fourth time I do this, I'll get it done, which is good because we only have 4 transitions like this. Here's VS again. This is VS 17.14, the one that was released last week. And we are looking at the eShop on Web solution modified slightly for this demo. This is a solution that has some Blazor applications, some class libraries, and some sort of classic Razor pages and HTTP APIs, along with some supporting unit and integration tests. Very emblematic of what I expect many of you have. This repository is on .NET 6, and that's a problem because, say it with me, .NET 6 is out of support. We need to get on to .NET 8 at minimum. And so we're going to use GitHub Copilot to make that happen. I've installed the version of the GitHub Copilot app modernization for .NET extension that is available publicly into my workspace, and I've brought up a GitHub Copilot chat thread where I can simply ask Copilot to help me upgrade this solution to a newer version of .NET. And that typo is only half accidental because the tool is very forgiving of that, right? You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be clear enough for the tool to understand what you mean. With that intent made clear, the tool kicks me into an upgrade workflow here. We're going to ask a couple questions about my goal. My goal, because I am the SDK PM and I want everybody on the latest, is to go to .NET 9. So we're going to go to .NET 9. And we're going to do a little bit of setting up here of some Git metadata. We're going to make sure we're on a clean slate so that I don't include anything except the migration on my branches. And main is good. And it's going to generate a name for me to push this to. You know what? That sounds great to me. I love being slightly flippant with it. So at this point, with all of sort of the initial setup data done, it's going to start inspecting my project or my workspaces. And it's going to find something kind of alarming. It's going to find that I have vulnerable NuGet packages. And while I could do the upgrade to .NET 9 without addressing those, I would really like to end up in a space where I am sort of clean from a compliance perspective after this upgrade. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask it to address those issues as well. I'm clicking on the text, the little options that we put in there as much as possible to reduce the typing time that I'm doing. But for all of those instances, you can just assume that I'm typing in there something slightly snarky to it. Yep, sounds great to me. So with all of that data sort of set up and all that context, the tool is now going to generate a plan for this upgrade. Talking to some of you, this has been kind of eye-opening because the plan serves two purposes. It tells the user and Copilot what we're going to do when we start the upgrade, but it's that first one that I am really interested in because some of you have been talking to me about the possibility of using this in an educational way, not just a directive way, right? So this is an area that you will probably see some movement in, but for today, the plan gives you an ordered list of steps that we're going to do. And this is super important because this plan is Markdown. And Markdown is something that you can edit. And that's a huge headline feature that we want to sort of reinforce here is that you can change this plan. You have a high degree of control over how this upgrade goes. You can easily remove projects that might have specific requirements that you sort of know from past experience or intuition might not upgrade well and need some special hands-on time. You can change the set of packages that we're going to upgrade sort of by default, or you can choose different versions of them based on the knowledge that you have about your code base and the way that your team works. You can change this any way you want. I've had people come by the booth and ask, can this upgrade my unit test to a different framework while I'm at it too? And the answer to that is maybe. The answer is maybe for a lot of LLM interactions, right? It's a probabilistic thing that we're working with. There are certain workflows that work super well that we are trying to make very crisp and clean, and then everything outside those boundaries is kind of a your mileage may vary place. What we want you to do is to try the things that you want to do. If it works, let us know. Submit feedback in VS, submit feedback to our team email. There'll be a link a little bit later in this. But try things and let us know because we want to make the things that you are trying very often work very well. And that's going to be a little bit of a give and take because we're working with a prompt-based system here, right? Anyway.
I will say, Chad, we've been doing the Java one for a while, and we've made it a lot better since January. So the more feedback we get, the better we can make these things, and so we definitely want the feedback.
So I was going to type it out, but it takes a little bit of time, and I don't want to spin that here. So I will just say remove utils.csproj from the upgrade. And I know I have a package that is a little bit out of date here, so I'm going to say add blazard.local storage and upgrade it to version 4.5.0 as we go along, just to demonstrate that you can make changes to these things and the Copilot will accept them. We've made some changes to the plan. Let's actually do the thing. So we will hit continue with upgrade. And at this point, we've switched into the second phase of this upgrade. The first phase was all about setup, all about understanding what's going to happen. And the second phase is all about executing on that plan. At this point, we could just stop and close down for the day and come back the next day and pick this up. Or we could continue on, and we would be able to pick up from this state. On the left-hand side, as we start executing the plan, you get this really nice sort of bubble down task view of the sort of high-level objectives of our upgrade. This should map really closely to what you had in that markdown file. At each step along the way, you're going to get details about what's going on. And as we complete it, you're going to get a more perhaps user-friendly view of what was done in each of these sort of categories of changes. You will see project file changes in here. You will see package updates in here. You will see lists of commits that are happening in here. For each kind of category of changes, we try and group those into a single commit so that they remain digestible and inspectable by you over the course of the upgrade. So far, things look to be going pretty good. I like to keep an eye on this timer up here. We've made it through sort of our core shared libraries, not a lot of crazy dependencies there. But I suspect, as some of you might, as we get closer to the top of the iceberg here, the more user-facing parts, we're going to have more dependencies and we're going to have more opportunities for errors. But along the way, we can see a whole host of package upgrades happening, all sorts of fun things. Let me come back to this and show you that. Whole bunch of package upgrades happening in here. So we are in the web project now. And this is starting to take a bit longer. Could it be because there are build errors? Yes, it could. Turns out that's the point of the demo. So up until this point, everything was going great. The tool was finding tasks that it could achieve, achieving them, and moving on. But we finally hit something that it doesn't know how to understand, a compiler error. And so we're going to navigate to the web project, which is the one that we are actively working on. And we are going to find.
Yeah, whenever we show these agentic tools, I want to make sure people are aware these will not be 100%. But in that minute and a half or whatever that was running, it already saved Chet probably an hour or multiple hours of time to go manually update all those projects by hand.
Yep. So here is actually the triggering error that I was trying to get to in the error list. In this case, this gans.xss library is an HTML sanitizer that we're using to protect this string field from user input. This was one of the packages that was flagged for a vulnerability upgrade. And so when that upgrade happened, it looks like there was some breaking change. And at this point, I have a number of options available to me, including finding my charger and plugging in my laptop before it dies. But I can enter into a session with Copilot and ask it why this failed. And it can offer up a bunch of suggestions for me. And some of those suggestions will be things like maybe the package upgrade introduced a version or introduced a new casing that we need to fix, or maybe they rearranged the internals of their package. So one thing it doesn't do today is reach out to NuGet.org and find things like README or your documentation that might be interesting there. And so I've had to do a little bit of research on the side. And it turns out that the actual cause of the problem here is a simple little casing error. And this is actually something that our friend Jared is helping us solve in a more automatic way. Thank you, sir. I'll put this over here. One of the cool things about this tool is that over time it gets more and more capable. And over time I have to find weirder and weirder demos to try and show off what it can do, because we're working on a version right now that will be able to use Rosalind's understanding of your code space to detect this kind of error and automatically fix it, right? So come back in maybe a month or so for a slightly different demo. But at this point, I've fixed this error, and I can just sort of pick up from here and say, I've fixed the problem. Please continue with the upgrade, Chief. And this is where some of the magic happens. We fixed an issue that was detected, and the tool will take a moment to learn what I did to fix that error. And if it appears anywhere else in the solution, then it will continue along. Like I said, just the right level of snark. And this recording user changes as your signal that it is learning from what you did. So at this point, we fixed this problem, and the rest of the upgrade for the web project should continue without major problems. Yep, and you can see it doing a little bit of analysis in this commit as to what happened. Right? So it's recorded in this commit the reason for the change for posterity if we need to go back and check it out. So we'll continue on through the unit test at this point, and this should only take a couple seconds of active time, and then we will have reached the end of our upgrade. But are we sure things work? No, which is why we have tests. So then we will kick into a flow where we run the unit test to verify.
You're showing a kind of a more extreme version, 6 to, you're moving multiple versions at the same time.
Yep.
If you're just moving from January to February to March, this would happen very quickly.
Well, if you're moving from January to February to March, those are going to be like servicing level upgrades,
right,
and there shouldn't be any API changes in there at all. If there are, we messed up. Okay? If there are, we messed up, and you should log issues on the .NET SDK repo or other repos and yell at me specifically.
Well, or we fixed a bug and you depended on the bug.
This is true.
Which I have done in my career in ASP.NET.
Oh yeah, given the size of our customer base and the number of APIs we put out there, any change is a breaking change for somebody. Yeah. So we're sorry. Also, use these tools to help you migrate. So we finished our migration and we ran the tests, and everything, thankfully, is green. So at this point, the Copilot will sort of generate a summary for us of all of the things that it did, both user-assisted and automatic, and give that to us in a markdown form. You can do whatever you want with this artifact. I really like the thought of putting it in as a PR summary to sort of give context to what was happening here. And here's what that report looks like. A lot of this should look really similar to what the plan was in the first place. We were going to take these projects and upgrade them to .NET 9. We were going to take these projects and unify and upgrade the versions of the packages that they use that we asked, including our dedicated Blazor local storage, which did not appear on there, but it does the vast majority of the time. And then at the end, we have some thoughts for where you should go with this, right? So this is a best effort upgrade here. You gave us a plan. We tried to execute on it. There's all the commits that you can go review. You have to review them. Like any other Copilot tool, you're in control here. You need to make sure that it passes your quality checks. So like in some of the conversations I've had with you, the better your testing is, the better your PR validation pipelines are, the more confidence and the more you can lean on this tool and tools like it. So that is where the demo ends for the .NET AI-assisted upgrades using Copilot. I want to take a moment and sort of talk about some of the impact this is already having inside Microsoft and with some of the partners that were so kind to be part of the private preview for us. This, I went a little past by the timer, but the actual time spent by Copilot doing the upgrade of these 8 projects was about 2.5 minutes. And even if it only got me like 80% of the way, that is still a whole bunch of things that I didn't have to do. I could go make a coffee, and I do that several times a day. So I could have taken my break there. But we've had partners trying this at Exact and FMG and internally at Teams and Xbox that have already seen crazy accelerations in the time it takes them to do these upgrades, right? The same problems that you all have about keeping up to date with frameworks, we have inside Microsoft as well. It's not a monolith. Teams have different pressures, and teams have different delivery timescales. So if we can deliver tooling that accelerates that time to upgrade in any way for you, like that's a thing we really want to do. Last note, supported project types for this are slightly constrained from the .NET Upgrade Assistant. Part of that is because some of those project types don't exist in a modern .NET world. But within core to core, like the vast majority of project types that people use are supported by this. And if you have a project type that isn't, leave us feedback. We want to make it better. We want to expand the capabilities that it has, and we want to expand where you can use it. And we'll talk about future state a little bit more. And just a quick note, this is in public preview. So if you go to aka.ms/.net/upgrade, you will go to our landing page that takes you to the V6, and you can get going with it right away. So that was Upgrade, but that's only one of the two main topics that we wanted to talk about here. And you have about 3 seconds before I'm going to switch this. What about AI-assisted modernization, Scott?
Yeah, well, you can leave it up there if you want for a second.
Okay.
Just leave it up. If you watched the keynote this morning, you saw 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗸𝗀𝗀𝗀 basically upgrade a Java project, and in some ways he modernized the Java project as well. And we want to let you know we're, of course, doing .NET as well. It's not just doing Java. And I want to talk about the class of tool that I'm going to show in a second. It's a slightly different class. It's when you saw the AppCat tool, that's the one that generated all the things that were wrong with my application and before I moved it to the cloud. As I said, that's a static analysis tool. It basically generates a file or a list of stuff, and you've got to go do that work. So that's work on you. How do we help you with that? And so we have a tool. The .NET version is not public preview yet. If Timothy's in the room somewhere, he hand copied it to my laptop yesterday. That's how new the tool is. But what it can do is it has what we call formulas. And so for the top 10 things that AppCat tool can find, we will ship pre-built formulas for you. And so what happens is, if you saw Jay's demo, there was a bunch of buttons, and he could click a button and say, I want to fix that thing, I want to fix this thing, I want to fix this thing. But I don't want to stop there and say, yeah, we're just going to go give you a bunch of formulas that the AppCat tool can generate. You can also make your own formulas. So there's a session tomorrow with Timothy NG, and he's going to do a deep dive in the technology behind this. But while I'm going to show some of the pre-built formulas, you can make your own formula. So let's say you want to move from one image library to a different image library, and you would do that across your entire code base. Today, you probably do a bunch of find and replace and do that, and then just compile until it works. The way this tool works is you actually can go make that change in a couple files yourself. Hand do the change in a few files, and then from that commit, we will then generate a formula, which technically is just a prompt. And the cool thing is you can actually open the formula, look at it. You can change, just like the file you were showing on the .NET Upgrade, it'll be a similar file that we generate off the commit you gave us. And if you want to go change that, however you want to change it, I don't like how we built the prompt, you're welcome to change the prompt and make your own prompts. And so I think of, because as I was saying before, we hear from customers that moving from on-premise to the cloud can take 8 months, that's just way too long. Even fixing the things that AppCat tool told you to fix might take months, because in many cases, the developer who built that application is not around anymore. So it's a new developer trying to come up to speed with an old code base, those types of things. And so this tool is super cool. The sample that I have here, this is from a Java customer. Yeah, you can flip it over. This is from a Java customer that we had in China. And they decided to move from Amazon, AWS, to Azure. And so they reached out to us. This is maybe a year and a half ago, and they're like, we need help. We have to convert all of our code from Amazon S3 storage to Azure storage. That's a big change. And so this is a .NET version of the same kind of thing here. You can see that I've got S3 storage at the top here using Amazon.S3. Today you would, as I said, find and replace. It's a lot of work to go manually do this across your repo. This is a new tool. I can open up over here, and I've got a bunch of formulas that, in our case, it's ones that we made as part of the team. But I said you can do your own as well. And so notice that one of these is .NET AWS S3 to Azure Blob Storage. And so let's go run that. And it's going to start working. little slow.
This is actually one of the things, so we'll talk about future state for the .NET stuff later, but we have hot bits completely internal still about what that looks like in VS Code and how to communicate status to the user in the Copilot chat in VS Code is one of the big open questions. So if you have thoughts about what you'd like to see when any of these tools are doing things, let us know.
Okay. So now it's doing a bunch of stuff here. Let's go scroll back and look at all this. Start doing this. It's going to go modify these, analyze a bunch of this.
So it was doing a lot.
It was doing a lot. These are the code changes we made over here. Blah, 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 blah. Lots of work here. Yeah. Let's continue. In some ways, that was showing you kind of the plan. What that really was here's all the changes I think I should make. I obviously verified those very, very, very clearly. I was making sure those are the right things. And now it's actually going to start going and doing some of the real work here. So let's let it go.
Nice. OK, so it's identified there are like 5 files that it needs to change?
Yeah, it does.
Code migration and app settings JSON?
Yep.
Cool.
And you see my controller has to be changed. CSproj, got new packages.
So when it generates the code here, is it doing the sort of typical Copilot thing where it's absorbing your Copilot instructions where you might have put like what the idioms of your code base are?
Yes, your code's going to stay in the same style as it was before. That's some of the prompts that we already put in here. So It's like, hey, as you go make these changes, do them in the same form, the same style as the code that was here. You can obviously add your own file there as well. Or as I said, you can actually open the formula and edit the formula to be however you want the formula as well. You could tell it to go use your instructions as well.
I just want to make sure it doesn't like try to rewrite away from collection expressions because that is like, you can take that from my cold dead hands.
So I'm on the wrong Wi-Fi, and I think that's why it's slow as death, but because it's going to the cloud.
But yeah, no, so the really interesting things to me here are how you generate and synthesize and sort of share that formula. Because we do a little bit of that in the upgrade, and then there's a little bit of learning that happens as the upgrade progresses. But it's really quite exciting to think of this ability to, within a company or within an org, make these shareable migration paths that can accelerate all of your team. Or even, I'm thinking in other sort of more esoteric cases, I work on MS Build, and lots of people, or I think lots of people, should have an easy path to making MS Build tasks that do things a certain way. If I could make a formula that sets somebody up for success there, could it also generate code?
I'm going to do the crazy thing and try to actually change Wi-Fi. And
midstream.
See if we get a better Wi-Fi midstream. So we'll switch off my screen for a second while I fix this.
Sure, all right. Well, while he's working on that and seeing if it works, I mentioned some of the sort of avenues.
It noticed, Copilot, it appears you're not connected to the internet. Yeah, thank you.
Nice. So I mentioned some of the future opportunities for enhancement for the .NET upgrades, right? One thing that you may have picked up on was we don't currently suggest or support framework to core on our thing. It's coming. We know, trust us. In the meantime, what we suggest you do is use the existing .NET Upgrade Assistant to do that framework to core, and then pick up on our tool when you go core to core because it's more flexible, right? So a little two-step there, but then you're on sort of the paved path, if you will. Also, the demo was entirely in VS. The tool is VS only right now. You go to the VS Extension Marketplace and install it, but we know a lot of teams are polyglot, a lot of teams use heterogeneous editors, and we know that a lot of teams really enjoy using VS Code. So that's on our roadmap too. Give us feedback, let us know like how important this is to you versus framework support versus XYZ other project type support, because your input obviously is one of the things that we use to drive our development cycle. And then lastly, scalability is a thing that we're interested in. I showed a demo of a relatively small project that took 2.5 minutes of active time, another 10 minutes of talking and fixing a couple small things that came up. Every project you have is going to be more complex than that, right? And many of you have many, many, many workspaces per dev. And so it can sometimes feel that when you go to upgrade one, and then the next and the next, by the time you get to the end of that list, you're circling right around to the beginning to do it all over again, right? So what I think we should be looking at, and you let us know if you agree with this, is a sort of bulk or batch way to do this, right? Wouldn't it be great if November rolls around and .NET 10 SDK rolls out, and some mechanism has triggered automatic .NET 10 upgrades for the repos and projects that you are most involved in or most care about to get that jump on things, right? So those are some thoughts that we have, and hopefully that covered enough time for you to show us some cool stuff.
We started over again
Hey!
with Wi-Fi. It's amazing what Wi-Fi does for AI. So now you can actually see stuff actually changing. You can see packages being changed in the source code. You see now there's an Azure Storage blob here. There's an Azure Identity here. You can see all these code changes being made. So we're actually making progress now.
Nice, nice. I gotta say, it's kind of magical, like once you agree with the plan that it's doing, to just watch it go file by file and do these wholesale
Just watching the code
rewrites.
go,
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy.
Nice, okay, so it's got a clear, or it seems to have an understanding of like surface level changes, like the first wave of changes, and then an awareness that those changes might cause, you know, if you have project to project dependencies, changes in project A might influence B and so on. Cool.
There we go. It's been completed at the code level.
Nice. And I assume like this is a normal Copilot integration with the IDE, so you could presumably say, okay, great, go ahead and run the test and make sure things are still
It is,
blah,
yes.
blah, blah. Nice.
It would do the same. This is an early prototype.
Yeah.
Normally it would actually run tests and stuff like that. This version, this thing didn't exist 2 weeks ago. So.
Yeah. So that's kind of the power here, right? We're looking at tools and workflows that are solving specific problems in a general interface that is super powerful that you can use to compose together these.
Because you notice it did build this, at the end of the thing. It built and did all that kind of stuff. And so that project actually moved completely from S3 to blob storage. Just another fun anecdote when you think about this is the Azure Functions team. They wrote a great migration guide that's on the public internet and on Learn at Microsoft. We were able to take their migration guide, put it into agent mode, and agent mode was actually able to convert an AWS Lambda project to an Azure Function project. And so what they did is they just kept making that there we go. You having technical problems?
It went flickery there for a second.
And so they were able to do a full migration from Lambda to functions just by having written a great migration guide.
Nice. These guides, like talking to some folks at the booth, like they're not just for the tool. They are also for the individual developer. They're good guidelines just in general.
Yes.
So I find this virtuous cycle starting to happen with the influence of AI. Like there's more persisted documents of all kinds, not just design docs, but guidelines for doing different kinds of development sort of everywhere.
Cool.
Cool. Well, that is the end of the 4 demos. So just to sort of recap, what we were trying to show was a distinction maybe between, well, as we see it, between upgrades and migrations or modernization that many users may not see. And what I think is going to happen, especially as we start leaning into these chat-based, LLM-based interfaces, is that line between upgrade versus modernization versus replatform is going to get blurrier and blurrier, right? There are going to be these tools that handle each slice of that well, and then something that stitches them together to solve your actual end goal. And there are already conversations happening amongst teams working on some of these tools that you've seen about ways to incorporate them together so that the artificial line between upgrade in VS and modernization in VS Code disappears as we invest more. So that is something I am personally quite excited to dig into in the future.
And it did build.
Hey, love to see that.
Cool.
That's kind of the end of the demos, but if you are interested in more discussions or hands-on time with modernization, the 131 breakout is, I think, the deep dive that Tim and those guys are doing.
Yep.
That's tomorrow, I believe, but check that out on your schedule. And tomorrow or Thursday, I'm trying to remember, is a dedicated lab happening as well. So if this is a topic of interest to any of y'all, and based on the conversations I've been having, everyone has this problem, strongly encourage you to go check out these sessions or come by the AI-assisted app modernization booth. We'll have people there from these products and other products. We had somebody I was working with yesterday that was working on the SRE agent, the Site Reliability Engineer agent that was also demoed during some of the keynotes there. Super exciting tech. You can imagine a world where you start with an upgrade and then push that into a PR. That PR deploys to a preview space, and the SRE agent is like keeping an eye on that preview workspace or preview environment, and if it passes a certain level of checks, might put up a PR to promote it or something.
Even like the SRE agent, one of the things that I don't know if we did it in the demo because I don't know what stayed in Jay's demo, but one of the things that we were going to do in the demo was the SRE was going to detect that we were on an old version of .NET, and it was going to go make the PR to go move to the new version of .NET using these tools, and then the coding agent was then going to go do that work, and then the SRE would have potentially put it into staging, and then ran the test against it in staging. So that's the idea that comes out of these tools, and I think like SRE, other cool parts of SRE is being able to go monitor your application, and the first thing, if our application is using too much memory, I would call you, and you would go to some portal, and you would go look, and that looks like there might be a problem. Then you might go and run some command line tools to go get a dump from that thing, so you could then go analyze it. The SRE will do all that for you. Literally, you'll get a note. Here's the dump from the app that I think is using too much memory.
Yep.
And all those steps in between just get ripped out from that. So it's just can make life so much more easy, more productive when you just have the stuff you need right in your face.
I'd love that. We have a few minutes left. I know there might be questions out there. We'd love to take and field them for you. If you do have questions, there's a mic right in the middle of there. Please go ahead and just line up and speak clearly into the mic so that we can get it for the recording. And we'll spend the next 3 minutes or so.
We can probably answer one.
One question in deep detail. We have one brave soul.
Hello. I'm responsible for a large legacy code base, MFC, C++, C++, CLI, Net Framework, WCF. Any hope for me, or am I doomed?
So all I'll tell you is the tool I showed that was doing that move from S3 to like Azure Storage, that tool started off as a Java tool, and now we're doing it, converting it into .NET. There's nothing preventing us from doing it for Python, C++, JavaScript, et cetera, afterwards. It's just the order of progression that we're going to go in. So if we get feedback from folks that they're looking for a tool that can do those mass kind of changes across your repos, then great. If you're looking to move from MFC to WinForms, that is out of scope.
Got it. I'll probably stop by the booth and get into better detail. Thank you.
Because that's a massive technology change.
Oh, yeah.
But we can help you with your current code.
Yeah, thank you.
So once upon a time, Microsoft was responsible for Wix, Windows Installer project that is now owned by FireGiant. Some of the people here are probably familiar with it and have a few installation projects lurking about. And so earlier this year, FireGiant announced that they cut support for Wix 3, version 3. Migrating, I can speak to this from personal experience, from 3 to anything else is one royal pain. You have a limited set of project types that you support, so I suppose this is a desperate request to add Wix to that list of project types.
I hear that loud and clear. All of the .NET SDK installers are built with Wix, and we are currently undergoing that same modernization right now. I know one guy, our installer guy, has been working on it for quite some time. I had not joined this project when he started that, and had I joined this project before he started that, I would have said, use this tool and help us figure out a way for it. There are a bunch of people that have come by the booth that have had similar kinds of problems. This tool X doesn't support my specific use case. How can I accelerate myself with the tool? And in all cases, like we just would do some back and forth and talk through the specifics of the problem, but it turns into like a biting or eating the elephant one bite at a time kind of thing. You don't have to get perfect, but if you can identify a specific problem you're having and enter into a conversation with the LLM to solve it, and then importantly, ask it to snapshot a set of instructions, then you can persist that and work on the next problem and then proceed.
But is the opportunity to create a snapshot, as you demoed, predicated on the project type? Like, do you have to support the project type that you're giving the snapshot on?
For the upgrade tool, yeah, there's a lot of specific knowledge about the way .NET projects interrelate. But for an arbitrary Copilot chat session, like, it's just bringing the context it has from the baseline level of learning that it has. So anything that's out there, like documentation on Wix 3 or Wix 5 or 6, from the time that the model was created, you'll have that available just ambiently.
But you can also put that, just as I mentioned before, when the Lambda stuff, when our functions team was able to build a tutorial of how to move from Lambda to Azure Functions, the LLM was able to read that and use that. If there is potentially, I mean, I've not talked to Jock about this, but in Canada, but if there was the right documentation, maybe the LLM could be useful at helping you make some of these migrations.
Yeah.
If you have not tried that, you should try that. Upload the
Yeah, and once we sign off from here, I'm going to DM Jacques, the guy he was just talking about, and say, hey, you should really consider doing this. So, cool. Yeah, we're a little bit
Thank
over
you.
now. Thanks, everybody.